Okay, when it comes to a teacher that made an influence on me, or gosh, I mean, over the years there's been so many of them, but the one that jumps, actually there's two of them I'm going to talk about, but the one that jumps to the forefront as a teacher would be Mr. K. I met Mr. K in my senior year in high school in my Algebra 2 math class. Now, I wasn't a great student. I was like your C student. You know, I went to school. I just wanted to play sports. I was a football player, wrestler, and I needed to get those C's to play sports. So I applied myself in sports and did very well, but never really applied myself so much in school. If I got the C's, I could play sports. That's what I needed. Now, with Mr. K, there was something different with him. I walked into that 12th grade Algebra 2 math class, and I guess it was back during the days when and as a teacher, I still see this today. Is like some students think that the teachers like maybe live at school and sleep at school. You know, like there's like no life outside of school. With Mr. K, it was different. We knew that he had a life outside of school. He used to talk about his life outside of school, and it was pretty interesting. You know, he would spend a couple minutes maybe during class talking about how he was a travel agent and about how he traveled to pretty cool places and saw pretty cool things. You know, and just being like a high school kid who hadn't really traveled a lot, I found that interesting. You know, I was like, wow, Mr. K, he's a pretty cool dude. You know, he goes to some pretty cool places and he doesn't sleep here at school. I mean, he actually has a life outside of school. And I think a lot of kids kind of forget that. And today I'm a teacher, and I think maybe some of my students forget that I don't live at the school or sleep at the school, that I have an outside life that I try to share with them, thanks to the example Mr. K set. Now, with Mr. K, my math teacher, I blew the C's away. I mean, I got A's in his class the entire way through school and, you know, throughout senior year. And when I was talking to him, whenever I bump into him in the hallway or see him somewhere, he would say, "Dan Blanchard, the highest grade in my class. Wow." He goes, "I'm so impressed with you. I'm so happy you're doing well." And nobody had ever really complimented me like that. Nobody had ever said that Dan Blanchard has the highest grade in my class. But Mr. K used to say it all the time, which really fired me up, you know, and took some of those juices that I was using for sports, and I kind of put that into his class. And I started getting like those straight A's and had the highest grade in his class. I didn't do that for the other teachers. I don't know, maybe I thought they still lived at school and didn't do anything else outside of school. But me and Mr. K had a really good connection. And I got to tell you, years later when I got married, and I was looking to go on my honeymoon, I went and found Mr. K's travel agency. I hadn't spoken to him in years. I went and found his travel agency and said, "Hey, Mr. K." I walked in the door and he said, "Dan, you look the same. Like you haven't changed a bit." And we sat there and we talked and we laughed about the old times. And he's like, "Where do you want to go?" And he set me up with my trip for my honeymoon. Now, for the next teacher, I'd like to go into, let's say, the coaching role. There was an adult that I grew up with, and I never really thought of him so much as a teacher or a coach. I always called him Mr. Knapp. He was my buddy Johnny's dad, and he approached me one day and he said, "Hey, son," he goes, "You play football with my son, and I'd love to have you come to a wrestling practice with me and my son." And I was like, "I don't know, I'm a basketball player." You know, but he kept talking to me and he talked me into coming to a wrestling practice. And then he goes, "I'm going to pick you up Saturday. I'm going to take you to a wrestling tournament." Right? So he came to my house nice and early, picked me up, you know, showed me a couple moves that week, and then picked me up, went to the wrestling tournament down by the shore. And in that wrestling tournament, I took first place. I couldn't believe it. You know, Mr. Knapp was patting me on the back. Again, I always kind of thought of him as Mr. Knapp, but many years later when I reflect, I think maybe he was my coach. He was more than just Mr. Knapp. You know what I'm saying? He was my wrestler coach. And for years, he used to come to my house, pick me up, and bring me to wrestling practices all over the state of Connecticut, sometimes all over New England. He would bring me to wrestling practices. He would bring me to tournaments. He would talk to me about wrestling moves, you know, and he made sure that I got some really, really good coaching outside of just the normal coaching that people tend to get from just their high school coach. And I got to tell you, even when I graduated high school, you know, spent time in the Army, was into college, he was still showing up at my door to pick me up every Tuesday night. For over a year, he did this. He picked me up every Tuesday night and drove me 2 hours into New York City so that I could wrestle at the New York Athletic Club with some of the best wrestlers in the world were there. And I don't know if I ever truly thanked him for the difference he made in my life. But I got to tell you, he made sure that I was off the streets, staying out of trouble, going to wrestling practices, going to tournaments, and it didn't matter how far away this stuff was, like the New York Athletic Club. That was a good 2.5 hours to get there, and then to come home that same night. Those were long, long nights. And I'm sure that Mr. Knapp, maybe I should call Coach Knapp, I'm sure he had to work early in the morning, but he still did this stuff for me. So I would say that, yeah, Coach Knapp is a guy that made a difference in my life. Maybe he knew I had a difficult life, but he really, really helped me exceed and succeed in the sport of wrestling so that I would have some self-esteem and some confidence and someday pay it back, like I do now. I pay it back as a wrestling coach for a lot of youth, especially troubled youth. And with Mr. K, I pay it back. I'm a school teacher and I make the difference in a lot of people's lives. Especially troubled kids, some of our most vulnerable populations. So, yeah, those two guys were awesome for me.